Hello, and welcome back to the World of Wysteria. This afternoon I will be reading Chapter 6, and this will be broken into 2 videos. Wysteria, Chapter 6, Part 1. When he awoke the next morning, Will was overjoyed. He'd found the girl. He'd talked to her, even learned her name. The mystery of who she was and why she was so different had been solved. Though if what she'd said were true, more questions were raised than were answered. Last night, he'd accepted what Emily had told him. Now, however, he began to have doubts. Will knew that he didn't go anywhere when he fell asleep. These dreams occurred in his mind. So, how could another person, a real person, enter them? Could it be some form of telepathy? Was she projecting a thought signal that his brain could pick up, allowing him to see and talk to her? As he thought more about it during the day, he began wondering whether it might be simpler, and certainly more reasonable, to believe that Emily was merely another character. Like Lily, unique and lifelike, but a product of his mind nonetheless. This more logical explanation didn't feel right, though. Emily seemed too real. But perhaps it was only because he wanted her to be. Maybe his strong inner desire had produced a character programmed to convince him that she was real, rather than his creation. He needed to talk to her again. For now, he would keep an open mind. To Will's delight and relief, Emily returned to Wysteria again that night. They hadn't spoken about a place to meet, but he found her in the garden, sitting on a bench in the courtyard at the base of the stairs. "Good morning, Emily," he greeted her. "I usually call it morning too," she replied. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty spot next to her. "Please do," she said with a smile. Though Will had many questions, he wasn't sure how or where to start. He considered opening with some small talk, but... "So, you're a real person?" he asked her, immediately realizing how silly the question sounded. "Yes, Will, I'm a real person," she answered, giggling. "That's a funny way of putting it. But yes, I'm a flesh and blood human being, like you, when I'm not dreaming. Obviously, I'm the first dreamer that you've met here." "Well, yes," he said. "Do you mean there are others?" "Many others," she replied. "Really? How many?" "Oh, I don't know," she said casually. "Thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more." "That's a strange thought," he said softly, staring down at his shoes. They sat in silence for a moment as Will digested this new revelation. Then Emily stood up and stretched her arms above her head. "Do you mind if we walk?" she asked. "Not at all," he said, rising to his feet. "So, we're both dreamers then," said Will, as they strolled across the grass toward a small pond to the south of the courtyard. "That's what you call us?" "Yes, we're dreamers," she said. "But you and I are different types of dreamers. You're what most people call a builder, while I'm a traveler. A builder, he said. That's the most common, most generic term, Emily explained. There are others: shaper, creator, craftsman, scaper, short for dreamscaper. Builders not only dream, they have the ability to create stable dream worlds, worlds that stay in place, like your world here. I can't do that. Then you only visit other people's dreams, he asked. Yes, she replied. That's what dreaming is for a traveler. I roam from world to world, visiting with friends or exploring new places. There are lots of strange and beautiful worlds out there. Of course, there are some nasty ones too. I see, he said. So how long have you been doing this? For a few years now, she told him. I had some true dreams, waking dreams, when I was younger, but it was sporadic. I drifted into a few worlds, but I had no control over it. Then I learned to travel, and my life changed forever, as I'm sure yours has too. Yes, it certainly has, said Will. When they came to the pond, Emily knelt down on the grass and ran her fingers through the water, scattering the goldfish that hovered near the shore. She sat back and looked at the sky, then closed her eyes and smiled as the soft breeze swam through her hair. Will sat down next to her and watched the ripples move across the surface of the water. Could what she told him be true? Was Wysteria a world, one of many, existing somewhere in dimensional space? Or was this lovely visitor and this whole conversation with her purely imaginary, nothing more than electrical activity going on inside his brain while he lay sleeping in his bed? Emily opened her eyes and gazed across the garden. You're fairly new at this, aren't you? She asked him. Yes, he replied. About a week. Really? She said, sounding surprised. I would have guessed longer. You've created quite a charming little world. It's very pleasant. That's why I came back. It's tranquil, beautiful. She paused and looked at him. It's all a reflection of you, you know. Will smiled and blushed, he assumed. I'm glad you like it, he said. And I'm glad you're here, wherever here was. She smiled sweetly, and her brown eyes sparkled. Me too. They said nothing for a few moments. Then Will broke the shy silence. When you call this a world, isn't that just a metaphor? He asked her. This dream is taking place in my mind, right? Things here might look and feel solid, but they're not real, are they? Emily began to laugh. Real, she said. Yes, it's all very real. You created it with your mind, but it's here now. A world in the dream universe. That's why I can visit it, because it exists, because it's a world. I don't travel into your mind, Will. I'm not inside the skull that lies on your pillow at home. I travel to this world. Let me get this straight, he said. You say I'm a dreamer, specifically a builder. Yes, you are. And I can build worlds, worlds that become real once I create them. That's right, she said. Then, if this place is real, does it stay here when I'm gone? After I wake up? He asked. Yes, she answered. You see, when a non-builder has dreams, even true dreams, those dreamscapes are temporary. But a builder creates permanent worlds. You don't create a new world each night. You create a world you can come back to. It's stable. It's a place. And not just for you. It's a place that others can visit, like I am now, whether you're here or not. This seemed beyond fantastic. It was simply impossible. But if that's true, said Will, then where does it exist? If something's real, it has to have a location. That's difficult to explain, Emily admitted. I suppose you'd call it a parallel world, a place that exists alongside the waking world. It's another frequency. It's not far away. It's right there. You just have to step into it. And everybody does, almost every night. But real dreamers are different. We remember ourselves. We know who we are and where we are. That's why you can build and I can travel. Wow, he said. It's all a bit overwhelming. I'm having a hard enough time believing it, let alone comprehending it. I'm trying, but don't feel bad, she said. I don't understand a lot of it myself. I suppose you don't need to know exactly how it all works in order to do it. Still, like you, I want to understand what I'm doing. I think it makes you a better dreamer. Did you discover these things on your own, or did someone else explain them to you? Will asked her. Some of it I figured out, she said, but I've learned a lot from people who've been at this longer than I have. One person in particular. He's very experienced. In fact, he left the waking world many years ago. This is his home now. What? He said. You mean he's dead? He's quite alive here, she replied, giggling. But yes, he would be considered deceased in the waking world. Emily had dropped one bombshell after another, each one more devastating than the last. This all sounds completely crazy, said Will. No offense intended. None taken, she said. It does sound pretty crazy, doesn't it? It's not that I don't believe you, Emily. I do. At least I'm trying to. There's a logic to it, I guess, in a weird sort of way. But it's hard to imagine how it would all work mechanically. Are there laws of physics at work? Or is it just magic? That's a complicated subject, she said, yawning, and I'm starting to get tired. I was running around in some other worlds before I came here. Will asked her why it was that they had a time limit here. Your mind needs the rest. It needs to sleep, she explained. It also needs some random dreaming, some ordinary dreaming, just to sort things out. What about the person you mentioned? The one who lives here, he asked. I believe immortals need to sleep too, she said, yawning again, more deeply this time. Immortals? We'll talk more, said Emily, her eyes looking sleepy. Tomorrow. And we will return with part 2 shortly.